So I've added some connection points for the cable system, and they connect to the spider element. If we go back to the drawing of how this was accomplished, I had a great deal of difficulty actually making these stay in the plane that they're generated off. And I'll describe how I built these um, and what I wasn't able to accomplish, and that was to control their depth. It appeared that every time I tried to um, make these change with the beam depth, they would lose their ability to stay in plane and they would go off in odd angles. So I really left them this way without describing them as parametrically. So they're just components with fixed links to them. And that's going to be a problem when you adjust the beam depth. So you'd actually have to go back into this original drawing and correct it. I haven't figured out a workaround with that, but I thought it was important enough to just bring some closure to this project so we can not take too much time with this single detail. We can always come back to it. We can always solve the problem later, but I'd like to move on to putting the whole thing into a system that has a bit of a presentation to it. So anyway, these, if I was to step back through this, or actually I can just take this and dissolve it. What this is just a rectangle drawn on this plane. So I selected the top of the circle that's from the other adaptive component, and I set that as the working plane, and then that allowed me to draw on top of that surface, and you'll see that's in plane with it. So I'm just going to cancel out of that, and then the idea was then to take that and create a form. And when you dissolve these, what happens is you're left with this other form that was created automatically when you generate a form. So I'll go ahead right away and actually expand this one out again. And the idea was, as I pulled this up until it snapped into the top of the glazed or glass beam or structural column, and then I locked it to it. So it behaved pretty well, but what if we were to go back and load this into the project? And then I was to select these components, and I'll just tab until I can grab one of these and then select them all in the project. I'll get a chance to adjust this beam depth, and if I change this beam depth to 2 feet, you'll notice what happens here. Well, one is actually this is you can see how this is going all screwy. That's just because of the fact that that top wasn't carefully defined to snap to the top. When I locked it to it, it now doesn't understand, for some reason, its relationship to the plane. It's almost over-specified in its parameters. The one that isn't locked to the grid behaves normally. It still stays in plane, but the truss system moves away from it. So I apologize for not being able to solve that problem right away, and later on, if I do, I'll come back and address it. But for now, I'll just step back through this. We'll go back to that status. So the last thing I think we need to add to the individual elements of this is to put some kind of a bead, a silicone bead around the outside of the panel system, and that would help to represent that as a piece of divided glass where there might be an argon fill, or maybe even multiple layers, 3 or 4 layers of glass that make up this curtain wall system. So we really need something dark at that corner to define what's going on there. Otherwise we'd be in for a nasty surprise when the panels were actually built in a mock-up or in a more detailed rendering. So let's go ahead and go back to the curtain panel, and I'm going to click, I'm going to undo here a couple of times just to get back to this being defined as that was before I broke it down into its elements. And then the last thing to do is just to create some kind of, like I said, an element along this edge of the glass. So I'll set a working plane. I'll put a point on here. It's not snapping to grid. I'll stop the video. I'll try to troubleshoot why I'm not snapping to the reference line there, and then I'll come back.